Hello, I'm Darrell Wu, Vice President of My Sister's House Board of Directors.
And I'm Angela Lai, board member of My Sister's House, a nonprofit organization. The purpose of the show is to help individuals in our community recognize aspects of healthy and unhealthy relationships, as well as violence in our community.
We are part of My Sister's House, a Sacramento-based nonprofit organization focused on serving the needs of Asian and Pacific Islander women and children impacted by domestic violence. My Sister's House provides a culturally appropriate and responsive safe haven and community services. In a continuing effort to spread the word about domestic violence prevention, My Sister's House brings you this special program.
You are watching Healthy Relationships, brought to you by the Office on Violence Against Women.
A few months ago, there were several deaths within the Mian community from our area as a result of domestic violence. In one instance, not only was the wife killed, but also the older children. Today on Healthy Relationships, we will share tips on how to stay safe if you are in an abusive relationship, and how to work with law enforcement so that you or your loved ones can stay safe and healthy.
In 2010, 6,700 reports of domestic violence were called into the local police department. Most of those calls were not from the Asian and Pacific Islander women. We know that it is especially tough for women in our Asian and Pacific Islander communities to deal with difficult relationships. In this episode, we will be interviewing a law enforcement officer who will share with us how she will respond to a domestic violence call. We will also interview a Mian client who will provide some personal experiences.
Chio, thank you for meeting with My Sister's House today to share your story.
I've known my partner since grammar school. I don't quite know where in between, but I've known him since we were young, and we were together about half a year before I had conceived, and I had a little girl with him. I started noticing his behavior changes after we had our daughter. She was about six to 8 months. The first thing I noticed was the little taps and like the little slap in the face and stuff. Like I would say something really, really upsetting to him, that he felt that insulted him as a man or as a person. But I kind of, weighed that because I felt that, couples do have their disagreements and they get, slightly physical like that, and it was okay because of what I was brought into. During our relationship for the first year, there was no sign of nothing. It was just we have a little arguments, and we're young, so jealousy tends to always, it's around the corner, and you think that stuff was normal because, growing up, there's a lot of peer pressures and a lot of interesting going on our surroundings, so you kind of don't really look at it you don't really look at all the red flags. I've never noticed his jealousy towards the end of our relationship, when he really got possessive, and I couldn't really do anything without him present. That's when I started noticing he was being possessive. The first significant event was in 2005 in the beginning. It was before my daughter's second birthday. He kicked my door in, and he picked me up and threw me on the floor with my daughter crying hysterically in the background. And we was fumbling for a minute and fighting, and then I played him to stop because he was choking me, and my daughter was there crying, yelling, and so he stopped. He picked up my daughter and went into the room to calm her down, because I guess he somehow came to his sense that, you know, my daughter's crying, he needs to comfort her.
Did someone ever call the police to assist you regarding a domestic violence issue?
I went around a couple houses to an apartment complex trying to use a neighbor's phone, and she wasn't outside, so he caught me and was fighting, fist fighting in their backyard by their parking lot. And then my friend's husband came out and yelled at him and told him to stop. You know, it's not appropriate for him to touch me like that. And then our fight became my neighbor and his fight, because he was angry. And so him and my neighbor's husband got into a verbal altercation, which by that time I already fled the scene to run home to see to my daughter.
Have you ever called the police to report domestic violence?
Yes, I did. The dispatcher was a woman, and she was very helpful. She responded quickly. She stayed on the line with me until a couple officers approached to my door.
What was your experience with the police?
The first thing the officer did when they arrived was knock on my door, which barely was intact because he kicked it in. They viewed the scene, I believe, and they took notes, and then they asked me what happened. I was in fear and shock. That's all I felt. Some of the things they asked me was, am I okay? Do I have a place to go? Would I like to file an incident report? That's all I can remember before they handed me the brochure from my sister's house. When the officers were asking me all those questions, the only thing that was going on in my mind was just help. I don't know what to do. I'm confused. I want to be with the man. I need him to get help, but yet I'm young and I'm not resourceful, and we have a family together. That's all that went through my mind. I just want my family to be together.
Were you and your partner separated when interviewed?
He wasn't there. He left already. He fled the scene. And so nothing really happened. He came to the house a few days later and accused me of cheating. And then we got into a physical and verbal altercation. I recalled just him and I arguing, and then he just slapped me really hard across my face and pinned me down on the couch. That's all I remember. This time I had bruises on the right side of my head, on my scalp. He slapped me so hard where my pores was just all red, and it stayed there for a few days. My daughter she's always with me, so when all these incidents occurred, the first and this second one, she was present at the time. He has never tried to hurt my daughter physically. I don't recall anyone talking to me about any restraining order at all until the third incident that happened. All I remember was we was in the house arguing, and then it went from the living room and it took place in the room. And this time, he had a gun. And he threatened to kill me if I'm not telling him the truth and about me cheating. We had this big altercation, and then next thing you know, I remember him slapping me, and my nose started bleeding, and then I looked up and there was a gun in my forehead. That's all I remember. Eventually, he let me go after about 15 minutes of pleading. He left. He left with his friends. He left with 2 of his guy friends that was waiting for him in the living room. The police wasn't involved in this event. But later on, there was a follow-up, I guess, because of my first and second incident. It probably raised a red flag, and they came out. This is the time when the detective had called out for a family service worker or something like that. And I was removed from my home. I moved. And that's when I got help for a restraining order and some other resources.
Did you find out about my sister's house from the police or sheriff?
The only thing that they only gave me a brochure. That's how I found out about my sister's house. And they just told me to read the brochure, and I hesitated because I didn't know what they were gonna do and how they were gonna help me. Looking back, the only thing that was helpful I felt was the brochure they gave me. That was it. I held on to that brochure for a long time, and later on I used it.
Looking back, what about the experience helped you?
The positive thing that the law enforcement acted with me was they comfort me in some way in the wordings when they first approached me. And second, they gave me a brochure.
What do you wish they did differently?
Looking back, law enforcement could have, be a little bit more educated in domestic violence and be a little bit more resourceful. I know that their time on their hand is tight, but a little bit more time to help me get together and at least tell me it's not safe, I need to leave the place or something of that background, but I didn't receive none of that. Looking back on my experience, the only advice I would give, I would highly recommend the victims to call my sister's house. They are compassionate, they're willing to help. They have all the resources there to help you file for restraining orders. They're there to help assist you through this from point A to Z. They're willing to go through all the process with you no matter how much your struggle is. Every victim from my experience don't want to leave the perpetrator, and they have this way of talking you into doing what's right for you and your children.
Chio, thank you again for sharing your story with us. When we come back, we will get the advice from a law enforcement officer who has a great deal of experience with survivors and victims of domestic violence. She will speak to us about victims' rights and what she would do if she went out on a domestic violence call.
There's certain things I know that Asians are afraid to do or say, and so we need to respect and understand that and try to help them speak out without being afraid.
Welcome back to Healthy Relationships. We just heard from our guest, Chio, who was brave enough to share her experience with law enforcement. I'm now with Deputy Son Lofton, who is experienced in domestic violence situations in the Asian and Pacific Islander community. Deputy Lofton, what kind of training do police officers receive on domestic violence?
In the academy, there is a section, or the cultural diversity, where officers learn about how to understand and deal with calls regarding domestic violence in the Asian community, about their cultural barriers, language barriers, and understanding and respecting the culture. There's certain things I know that Asians are afraid to do or say, and so we need to respect and understand that and try to help them speak out without being afraid.
Does it always happen the way the police officers have been trained?
I want to say yes, but no. Every situation is different. When we go, we're expecting one scenario, and it's totally different. Sometimes there's an arrest made, sometimes there isn't. We try to separate the victims and try to ask them what's going on and make them feel comfortable and that not so afraid that they can tell a police officer what's going on, what happened, and not be afraid to report the domestic violence.
What if they need a translator?
We do have what's called a language line, where we call and we could ask what language that the victim is speaking, and they have a translator for us.
What are the victim's rights?
And the victim also don't have to be afraid because there's a confidentiality in their name that is on the crime report where they don't feel that it will be out in the public. It is confidential and no one will know that they're a victim of domestic violence.
What kind of advice do you have for a woman who has been abused?
They don't have to be afraid, and they need to report it. If they don't report what has happened, the police officer can't do anything. They can't make an arrest. They have to understand that nobody has a right to assault them, and they have to feel safe, and without their reporting it, nothing can be done. So don't be afraid and call.
Thank you, Deputy Lofton, for being here today and for sharing some valuable information.
หากងមេហ៊ីធ្វើតោហ្វេមกันหมายปัญหาห้างพ่อจ่ายนี้เจ้าว่าให้ดูว่าแฟนบ่ปลอดนิ้วไม่หมายปัญหานะขอดูว่าตำรวจเก่าเน่งๆใจว่าอ๋อยหิวตู้ใจเฟียนให้เจ๋งดูว่าบ่ยิงห้องต่อยนะดูว่า call my sister's house เน่งเก่าเน่ง6 4 2 8 3 2 7เน่ง
When we return, I'll be interviewing a representative of my sister's house as to how they advise clients to work with law enforcement.
I think that women should know that my sister's house cares about their safety. Law enforcement officials care about the safety of women and their children. Women that are hurt by their partners can get help.
With me right now is Citra, a representative of my sister's house, who will explain how to work effectively with law enforcement. Welcome, Citra. First, following our interview with Deputy Son Lofton, is there anything that you want to share or emphasize?
Yes, I think it's important for women to know that when you seek help from a law enforcement officer, you can ask that they keep your information and name private. Whatever you tell someone at my sister's house, it is confidential or private. We won't tell anyone. And we will not judge you or blame you. You don't have to worry about being embarrassed or being ashamed. Second, I think that women should know that my sister's house cares about their safety. Law enforcement officials care about the safety of women and their children. Women that are hurt by their partners can get help, but they have to be strong enough to ask for help and to accept the help. Keep in mind, you're not only helping yourself, you're helping your children grow up in a safer home.
From your experience, why is it important that women call the police if they need help?
In my experience, if there's physical harm actually occurring, the police are trained to assist. Second, should there be a divorce or child custody issues, it helps if there's a record that law enforcement has been called. Lastly, whether or not law enforcement is involved, if a woman has been abused physically or verbally with insults, bad words or threats all the time, or financially abused, or even spiritually abused, she should still reach out to an organization where people are trained to assist her, like my sister's house.
So how does a woman reach out to my sister's house?
All she has to do is call our crisis line at 916-428-3271 so that she can find out where and how she can go to get help.
And what if she doesn't speak English?
All she does is call the crisis line at 916-428-3271 and say her phone number several times, the language she speaks, and we will find a trained volunteer or staff member who will call her back and speak with her. Our number won't be identified, so she has to pick up the phone when we call. We won't leave a message because we don't want her partner to be upset.
What happens when someone calls my sister's house crisis line?
When someone calls my sister's house crisis line, We discuss ways to make sure that she and her children are safe. We create what we call a safety plan with her. We also let her know what resources are available, whether it be our shelter, our Women to Work program, or other support services. She just calls our crisis line at 916-428-3271, says her phone number several times, the language she speaks, and we will find a trained volunteer or staff member who will call her back and speak with her.
I've heard a lot of stories where women have called law enforcement and then they feel that their story was not heard or respected. What advice do you have for those women?
If law enforcement comes to your house and you feel you have not been helped out adequately, please ask for the officer's badge number. Even if you feel everything went well, you should ask for it so you can follow up. You should ask for the police report number too. You may need this for evidence in the future.
Are there other things she should ask for?
If there are visible bruises or injuries, severe threats, you may ask for emergency protective order. If police or the sheriff doesn't provide one, especially if there is a history of physically abused or threats, you should definitely ask for that emergency protective order.
Could you explain what an emergency protective order is and what it does?
An emergency protective order, which is in place for 5 to 7 days, is basically a document that tells the abusive husband, boyfriend, or partner to stay away from the victim, the wife or the girlfriend, until you file a temporary restraining order. It's important to know that an emergency protective order is just that, an emergency one. After that, you need to file a temporary restraining order. By calling our helpline, we can begin to help you with that process.
I can see that your 24-hour helpline is an important number to know. Can you tell us that number again so that women can call and get help?
Sure, any day of the week, any time of the day, including holidays, all you have to do is call our 24/7 multilingual helpline at 916-428-3271. She doesn't have to worry about her English or her family or community finding out because we're not going to tell anybody.
Thank you for joining us today on Healthy Relationships. We hope that this show has encouraged you to think about the relationships in your life. Remember, if you or a loved one is ever in need of help from any form of abuse in a relationship, you can contact My Sister's House Multilingual 24-hour helpline at 916-428-3271. 请记住，如果您或者你所关心的人身处家庭暴力情况，请拨 My Sister's House 的24小时多语言热线电话916-428-3271。
For more information on My Sister's House, please visit our website at www.my-sisters-house.org.
We'd like to thank today's guests, Deputy Song Lofton, Citra, and especially Chio. We'd also like to give special thanks to the Office on Violence Against Women for making this episode possible, and to the Crossing staff for the technical assistance.
That's all for today's episode on healthy relationships. On behalf of My Sister's House, thank you for watching.